Classic Plus seems no longer as just like a speculation or a wish, but based on the recently expanding of private servers, surveys, official ones, it is likely that it will be announced on this year's BlizzCon. Classic Plus, WoW starting all over again, a modified version of vanilla, has kind of been an idea that has gotten some serious traction, but based on the official Blizzard info, we know some features are more likely than others. So far, new zones, either modified ones like Gilneas before Cataclysm, Behind the Wall, or Mount hyjal seems very likely, but they even mentioned potentially brand new zones. Flying could be possible, we could get new specs and race class combos, and very likely retail races being added like reversely back to Classic, as well as things like Alliance Shamans and Horde Paladins. So what is the evidence that we actually have, and what are the most likely features we will see? If you think Classic, especially Hardcore, there is the perfect survival guide with rested XP. It gives you the safest routes, hostile enemy warnings, and now even with TBC Hardcore it will be 100% optimized for straight survival, amongst getting the absolute best, most optimal routes and information. Furthermore, rested XP offers midnight guides too, but best of all, if you use my link below, you will get 10% off your order immediately. So check out rested XP. So, if you've seen, everyone has been talking about this the past few weeks, and that has been for a good reason. It has been a topic of discussion for a couple of years now, actually, pretty much since the Season of Discovery was announced, and we realized there was actually the testing ground, but now we got new stuff. Now, to not give you some detailed description of what Classic is, we already talked about this in the previous video. I'd like to cover what we can expect, and not like based on wishful thinking, like people are saying we could see this and tying it together, but tying it together with an official Blizzard survey, which makes it clear what they think they could implement and what seems kind of likely. Actually, about a year back, some 10 months ago, they sent out this very detailed survey to select players, discussing a bunch of features which Blizzard kind of tends to do when they already are planning something. It's a predictor of what could happen, but now this survey is once again very relevant because we have a ton of new evidence that makes this actually likely, so it's no longer just in the talks. We know they already teased Classic Plus in an interview a few months back, but the Season of Discovery was kind of the biggest bit of evidence, as this was like the alpha version of this project to show us that playing Classic could be more than just replaying the same version of the game over and over again, and that they could kind of build a new World of Warcraft from the base game without all the expansions, which is technically not an alternate reality, but it just kind of adds more depth to the game itself, which I personally think is a great idea. That way we wouldn't have like 6 versions of WoW going around, like Retail, which is the main story, Classic, which is just like WoW in the past, and now like this new alternate reality. Based on everything we've learned from Season of Discovery, Classic Plus would essentially just be kind of added context to the current game. So, for example, while we visited the places we visited back in the day, we could see things from a different perspective, and all this actually happened, we just didn't personally witness it. One good example from Season of Discovery is that entire Scarlet Crusade questline that we never knew about in the past, or that Forsaken Paladin questline that we also didn't know about. A good example for what we could see, and this is what I mentioned in the previous video, is Gilneas, because Gilneas has actually been a thing since the start of the Warcraft series, the Warcraft franchise, and they're one of the original kingdoms of the Alliance of Lordaeron that later isolated themselves. We already saw that wall back in the day, but we only saw actual Gilneas when the Cataclysm shattered the wall, the Worgen Curse took over, the Forsaken attacked. However, these Gilneans actually lived like this whole life behind the wall. There could have been like potentially thousands of quest lines that we never saw, and this could be relived in this new version of Classic. However, the reason we're talking about this is the evidence from just the past like month or like a few weeks, which makes this seem actually very likely, more likely than ever. Reason number one, BlizzCon is in a few months, and there hasn't been a BlizzCon since 2023 when they announced the World Soul Saga. As you may know, since then Microsoft actually bought Blizzard, so we expected that the BlizzCon thing was over and they would just kind of show everything on Microsoft events, but BlizzCon is back, which means Blizzard specifically has a ton of very important announcements for all the Blizzard games. However, literally just like a few weeks back, Blizzard specifically flew in prominent Classic streamers, and not just like WoW streamers, but Classic ones behind a very strict NDA, which I think is a pretty big deal. If this was just a minor feature, they probably wouldn't do this, but the most important evidence that we have for Classic Plus happening is the fact that Turtle WoW was banned. I think this is like the most important thing thing we should currently focus on, because Turtle WoW was essentially Classic Plus. It was a community Classic Plus that was very popular. It has been around for quite a while now, and it didn't really bother Blizzard until they decided to just take legal action. If you remember last time Blizzard took legal action, shut down Nostalrias, that is when we got Classic itself, which means if they went out of their way like this, it's likely that they plan to do their own version of Classic Plus. They can kind of have a competing private server going around that would mess up their announcement, and more importantly would drive people away for paying them for Classic Plus. But this is already old news. The real question is, what can we realistically expect? I mean, what is actually realistic? And I think we have some exciting features that we can base on surveys. So some minor features were mentioned, like guild banks being added, things related to dungeons, but the more important things were options like adding flying mounts to Classic, which would be significant change to the base game, although I do feel like it would mess up the general slow pace of vanilla. The one that has the most evidence so far though is either expanding underutilized zones, adding brand new zones to the game, as well as giving us new and unexplored storylines. This is actually the main big feature they tested out in Season of Discovery, and they already added Killers and Crypts and Demonfall Cannon. These were kind of some unfinished areas, but we actually have more and larger ones that are in the game but that are barely used. This is Ashara being a more important zone because Classic one is completely different than what we currently have. Mount Hyjal actually being used, which could be a really big storyline. I mean, it could literally be an expansion's worth of storyline. And of course, Gilneas that I previously mentioned, as well as the Emerald Dream. Now, if you remember, those unfinished Emerald Dream screenshots are like some of the oldest speculation theories that we've had in the community. Now, this in my opinion seems like a very likely new features, literally right out the gate, that they could announce on BlizzCon, like at least 2 new zones that you could have, and not something minor like Killers and Crypts or expanding some minor areas. I'm talking at least a couple of completely new zones. They even mentioned in the survey brand new areas that are currently not in the game. I'm guessing by this they probably don't mean like a whole new continent, but some maybe isle, dungeon, underground thing that we've never explored in the past. Now, when it comes to the other biggest feature, this is something Blizzard extensively mentioned in the survey, and those are the races and the classes. One of the quickest features was just adding Alliance Shamans and Horde Paladins, but they actually had ideas of adding races from retail back to Classic, like maybe Blood Elves, which are technically there on the continent, just locked away, or potentially Draenei, like TBC races in Classic. But keep in mind, adding races like these could also open up some really interesting storylines. I mean, we could see Goblins and Vorgen. As I mentioned, I mean, the Vorgen from the Gilneas storyline, they could add, and the Goblins could be related to the Goblin towns in Classic because they're kind of all over vanilla. The interesting thing about these races is that their introduction to Classic could involve different storylines, like not the Cataclysm storyline, but this could be like a split off group that joined unrelated to the main one that will actually happen in the future, like how the Horde has used Goblins even though they technically weren't a part of the Horde, or like how we had Pandaren in Warcraft 3. Now, what I'd like to see most are new races like the Ogres or the Naga, but unfortunately I don't think that is likely. I mean, I feel like it would be kind of strange to just add a brand new race to Classic and not add it to retail. So while interesting, I'm not sure if they would go through all the effort, but I think it's very likely that it could be the other way around, for retail races to come to vanilla with modified storylines. Something they did mention though that they already tested in Season of Discovery are the race class combos and the specs, and in my opinion I think this is the most likely feature they will announce on BlizzCon. I'm talking like modified Warlock tanks or some sort of specs that are not in retail that could be very interesting, or just increasing the race class combos that we currently have. They did sort of mention new classes, but I don't think these would necessarily be like brand new concepts, but we could have like experimental specs. So not even like Forsaken Paladins, something related to that. They kind of already set that up in Season of Discovery. So to sum it up, I mean, so far, new zones, new specs, race class combos, as well as potentially flying or some minor features seem like the most likely things we could see. It does appear though, through the evidence, that Classic Plus though is very likely, not just like our wishful thinking, but something we could realistically see very soon. Thanks for watching. Check out my video on the 2 new planets that we've just seen in the new patch by clicking on the screen, and subscribe to my brand new Witcher lore channel by clicking on the screen as well. See you next time.